Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. Thanks so much for joining me today. I have this fat little robin. He's so cute and he's all ready for Christmas. And you can see here's the stamp. It is a penny black stamp. It's called Robin's Christmas, and it has the tree and the little wood bits there, some ivy, and then some holly to make it really festive. And then I'm going to be using the Joyous Holiday, another great stamp. I love this one. Has the I'm going to use this as the sentiment, but I often use that deer in that post box, that kind of British post box. And then I wanted to have a snowflake. I just pulled a couple here for you to take a look at. This one is a blizzard from Penny Black, and this one is flurries. You don't need both of them. In fact, if you have a snowflake, a large snowflake die, then use that one that you have at home. Then I have these two frames, and you can use either one of these. One is the Penny Black is antique frames, and the paper tray is called Torn Edges. They are very similar. There's a lot more frames in the Penny Black. And you can see in the end they're exactly the same size as the large one, but they aren't quite the same for the smaller ones. The Penny Black is a little bit more rectangle for the smaller ones, and the paper tray is a little bit more square. I'm going to use the paper tray because of that, but either one of these works extremely well, and so you can use, maybe you have something in your stash. The papers I'm going to be using are rather boring. This is a watercolor, a hot press watercolor piece of paper. Here's some white cardstock, and I have a panel here that's 4.5 by 6.5 that is white cardstock, and then an antique gray that is slightly larger going around the edges, and it is the exact same size. That antique gray is the exact same size as my white card base, so it will cover the whole front of it. But for now, what we're going to do is, you can see how that fits very nicely inside there. And so just make sure you have a nice border of the gray going around. But I'm going to get started by mounting the watercolor paper and the stamp in my stamp positioner. I have two inks. I have VersaFine Black Onyx. You can either use the big pad or the small one. I prefer the small ones, because I can get into small areas, and I'm using an archival gray. Both of these are archival, which means that they're waterproof. That to me is very important, because as I watercolor or color this whole scene, I don't want these to blur out. So I'm going to start out with the gray, and I'm going to go over the whole gray because I want just to show the pattern, so I know. So it's close to like no line coloring, but you'll still see some of it. And I'm just making sure that I have all of the design there, all stamped, and I'm using just the gray at first. And now I'm going to take the black, and this is again the VersaFine Black Onyx. I love this ink. Just putting little smatterings in there, as you can see that how the design becomes a little bit more alive. Just get kind of these areas. I'm avoiding the leaves, leaving the leaves gray. And now I'm going to start coloring these wood bits, and I have 3 colors here: pumice stone, black soot, and vintage photo. These are all Distress inks by Tim Holtz, and I'm going to start out. I've smushed all 3 of these colors onto my block. You can use either the big pads or the small ones. I'm using the little minis because they're easier for me to handle when I have a lot of them, but also it's easier for me to show on camera. And I've just smushed them onto a block there. I often put them right on my surface, but for today I'm going to have the block so I can move it around. And I'm just going to use, I want a lot of gray showing. I don't want it to be a heavy brown. And so I'm using a lot of the gray, some of the brown, and then the black, especially around that kind of knot where the tree is. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to define it. Now I'm not going to worry too much about a lot of the really fine definition, because later on we're going to crisp that up and you'll see how we go along with that. Now let's do this part of the wood. Again, I'm keeping it fairly gray, those little touches of brown and black. Now this is the frame I've chosen to use, so every so often I do kind of check what will be in view when I'm finished with it. And you can see it's not the whole scene. It's just a little vignette. And so I don't have to be real careful about coloring all of it, because I just need to have what will be inside that frame. I'm just continue to do these browns. Now we'll go on to the bird. I'm using the vintage photo and a little bit of the black, and I'm going to add Rusty Hinge here. Rusty Hinge has a nice kind of orangey color to it, and I do like that color. I'm going to use a little bit of black, so that's the vintage photo, the Rusty Hinge, and the black soot. And again, I'm not going to worry about the design, the detail, because I'm going to fill that in later. Put a little bit of black up at the top of his head and on his wing, and then down at the bottom there a little bit, just to give him a little bit of shading. And you can just paint along to however much you think you would like to put in. Now I'm going to do the breast, and you know he's a robin, so robins have a red breast. I'm using Abandoned Coral and Barn Door. Again, these are Distress inks by Tim Holtz. All the inks I'm going to be using, except for that VersaFine, except for the archival, I should say, are the Distress inks. And I'm just darkening that in there. And I'm not worrying about his eye too much right now, because we're going to go back and crisp up his eye. Just going to do the breast right now. Now I'm going to use some wild honey and just color his beak right in there. And now I'm going to just let him go for the way he is right now. And I'm going to use, to color the ivy, I'm using crushed olive and some peeled paint, and I put in a little bit of Rustic Wilderness. I don't have any of the Rustic Wilderness in a small square mini pad, so I'm using the large one for this, the same for the crushed olive. I'm going to start out with the crushed olive over all of those leaves. That is kind of a yellowish green, and then I'll go back over it with the peeled paint and a little bit, just a touch of the Rustic Wilderness. I want this to be a different color than the holly. You know, the holly is a very rich, dark green, where these I'm going to make a little bit lighter and a little bit more olivey looking. I'm just going to paint along again. Don't worry about so much the detail. We'll crisp that up in a little bit later. Now I'm going to use a Tombow pen. I'm using the N45. This is, I think that's the one that I chose, but you can choose any of a medium color Tombow pen. Tombow pens are water-based, and so I often use them to get into the little small areas, and I'm using that for the points of this leaf. So now that I've done that, I'm going to move on to the holly. The holly, as I mentioned, is a really dark green. And I'm starting out with Rustic Wilderness. I like that color for the base color, and I'm just putting down this base color, and then I'll go back over it. I'm going to check it with this frame that I'm going to be using, just to get an idea just exactly what is. I feel compelled to color all of it, but really a lot of it is not going to show around the edges. I'm using, again, you can use that a 177, or my favorite for the holly is 249 for this the pen the Tombow pen, and I do put a little bit, especially that 249, onto the edges, and I have a damp brush that I'm just then smoothing it out, just blending it out. See how I just add it to those points because I want them to be more prominent, and then I can spread it out a little bit and it makes it much darker. And it's easier for me to pinpoint with these and get the color that I'm looking for. You know, you can get one thing about the distress inks when you watercolor with them, they're maybe not as vibrant as maybe when you're using Daniel Smith or something like that. So these Tombow pens help with a little bit more intensity. I'm just going to continue to color those. And here there's a reference on the back so you can see exactly where they have some snow on some of the leaves and on the berries and the detail. And you can see there's a little branch. That's what I'm coloring right now. I have to use this because it's hard for me to see in the gray. So I am using this just so I can see where the branch is. I don't even think it's going to show actually. So you can see I'm putting that back up and getting an idea. But I'm going to put it in anyway because I can get some of my bearings about what's a berry and what's a leaf and what's a branch. I'm now going to color the berries, and I have 3 colors. I have abandoned coral, that barn door, and then aged mahogany. Again, distress inks. And I'm starting out with coloring them all with abandoned coral because I want to just put a base that's a little bit lighter. Then I'm going to go back in with barn door and darken and give some shading to it. And then where I want them to be very dark, I'm going to add some aged mahogany. We're just going to make these a little bit darker as we go along, adding in the aged mahogany. That gives a very rich dark color, but you don't want them all to be the same color, so you know, do vary them a little bit. Now I'm going to do the sky or in the background there, and I have peeled paint, chipped sapphire, and faded jeans for this. If you mix peeled paint, a little bit of peeled paint, and then chipped sapphire with a lot of water, you get kind of a grayish blue background or color, and that's what I'm looking for, and that's what this is. I have just a touch of faded jeans in there as well, but that's what I painted the whole background with. And I blot with just a facial tissue, and now I'm going in with a little bit more faded jeans and chipped sapphire down at the bottom to make it a little bit darker and a little bit richer, leaving the top being a little bit lighter. Just enough to blend it out. You see right there where I'm working, there's that little bit of snow bit, so I don't want to get any paint there. We'll address that in just a minute. So now I'm going, now that I've gotten the background, the sky, the way I want it, I'm going to go in with my, and it's really, really dry. Now this, I made sure that my panel was dry before I did this because I'm going back in with my VersaFine and my archival gray, and I don't want it to be wet because it will blur. You want nice crisp lines, and this is where we're going to get a really crisp. See how that just gives more and more detail to the bird and to the leaves. I'm adding just a little bit of that peeled paint for the ivy. For the that's just a little bit of the black soot that I'm adding in, and then I'm using that dark Tombow pen again, that 249 for the leaves, and I'm adding in the detail so that I can get the veining and the points to those leaves. It really, really helps when you do it that way. And I'm also going to be using a red pen. This one's 847, and I'm just coloring in the outside of those berries just to give those more definition. So I like when I color like this, that I can color, put in all the color in the backgrounds, and then crisp it up at the end with the detail lines. Just a little bit of the black soot. Want his little feet to show up. And now that I have that pretty much the way I want it, you can see that there's these little circles that were in the stamp that are to signify the snow. Well, I'm going to take my Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white, and straight out of the bottle I am just putting dots in where those little circles were, and they're all over to signify the snow falling. Putting a little snow there, you know, I told you that's where the snow is kind of gathering. Let's put a little under his feet. Any place where you think that might fall. There's a little bits on the leaves, on a few of these leaves, and on the berries. So I'm going to put a little bit of snow there. Just crisp up this snowy areas. And then I'm going to take a little bit of it and just splatter it. Not too much, but just enough. And then a little glint for his eye. Now we're going to let that set aside and dry. And I'm now going to take that frame. Again, like I mentioned, this one is Paper Tray's torn edges. And I'm going to use that white panel that we had in the very beginning. I've cut out so I have a nice frame around my bird now. He really sets that off, I think. And I'm going to take this antique gray and I'm going to use my double stick tape dispenser here, my giant one, and I'm going to stick it to the front of this card base so that it covers the entire front. And then next, I'm going to just get an idea how that's going to go. You can see we'll put a sentiment down at the bottom, this Christmas wishes. Then I'm going to use it, take it a little bit off-centered there because I'm going to have a snowflake. And I cut a bunch of snowflakes because I wasn't sure which one I thought I would use. But, and I like them all so much, but I think I'll end up with that one. I think that one is a Paper Tray ink one. And now I'm using dark indigo. And this is a Paper Tray ink color, and I'm stamping this. It gives you kind of a navy, but it's a little more faded, kind of like a denim blue. But I didn't want it too intense, but I want it to show up as well. It's a beautiful sentiment. The script on that is beautiful. And then I'm taking some, now that that's done and dry, make sure it's dry, and I'm putting some glue around the edges so that I can mount my bird. I'm not going to put any foam strips or anything on this. I'm not going to pop it up. I wanted it to just be, you know, just this subtle, really, really lovely kind of classic kind of card. And then we'll adhere it to the card base, adding some glue, making sure I get that on the edges. I actually have a book press, so I put it in a book press just to press this all down and make sure that it dries really flat. But you can put it between books. I do that a lot too. 2 heavy books if you want it to sit down really, really, really flat. And now all we have to do is add our snowflake, and I think that just sets it off. And there, our card is done. And here is the close-up of this sweet little bird. I think this is just such a lovely card, and you know, I love nature, I love birds, and I have a sister that is the same, so I think this will probably go to her, and I hope that she will enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed it too, and if you did, please give us a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, we'd be over the moon if you would subscribe. You can see I just used Penny Black's Robin's Christmas and then a bunch of Distress inks in those archival inks. There's a link down below. Just click that. It shows you everything plus a few close-ups. And I want to thank you again for joining me. I will have another video very soon, and I hope to see you then. Bye.